Every school sorts its students. Most of them are just quieter about the criteria. At Advanced Nurturing High School, the sorting is done in the open, on the first day, with letters. 4 classes in each year, A through D, and every student learns immediately which one they have been placed in, are at the top, D at the bottom. And because the letters are handed out before anyone has done anything, the obvious assumption is that they reflect the entrance examination, that the clever students went to A, and the ones who struggled went to D, and that the whole thing is simply a ranking of ability made visible. That assumption is wrong, and the class we are going to spend this time with is the proof. Class D is not the stupid class, it is the flawed class, and once you know that, everything about the room changes shape. The person who says it plainly is their homeroom teacher, Sae Chabashira, who has the manner of someone reading out a weather report about a storm she has no intention of sheltering you from. Many of these students, she explains, were placed here because of defective traits, not because they lack talent. A great many of them have a great deal of talent. They were placed here because alongside the talent there is something else, something the school looked at and decided was a problem, and the school builds its bottom class out of those problems. So the room contains a girl with near-perfect academic marks who cannot work with another human being. It contains a boy who is one of the finest athletes in the school and cannot pass a written test. It contains a student who is exceptional at absolutely everything and simply does not care what happens to anyone else. And it contains a boy who looks like nothing at all, and whose defect, in Chabashira's own assessment, is the most serious in the room, precisely because it consists of hiding what he is. That is the design. Each of them arrived carrying something excellent and something broken, and the school weighed the broken part and sent them here. It helps to look at the actual cards because the school does grade these students, in categories, before any of them has sat a single lesson. Academic ability, intellect, judgment, physical ability, and cooperativeness. 5 scales, and the last one does an enormous amount of quiet work. Take Ro Kusuke Ko-NG. Academic ability, A. Physical ability, A. On 2 of the 5 scales he is at the absolute top of his year, which makes him, on raw capability, arguably the most gifted student in the room and possibly in the school. His cooperativeness is rated E-, not EE-, a grade the school apparently had to reach for. He is in the bottom class because he is superb and will not lift a finger for anybody, and the school considers that a defect rather than a preference. Take Keisei Yukimura. Academic ability, A. He is one of the sharpest students in the year on paper. His physical ability is a D-, and his cooperativeness is a D-, and those 2 marks are enough to outweigh the A. Take Ken Sudo. Physical ability, A. He is a genuinely outstanding athlete, the sort of school would ordinarily build a team around. Academic ability, E. The gap between those 2 letters is the entire reason he is sitting where he is sitting. And take Horikita, whose academics are a grade and whose cooperativeness is an E. 4 students, 4 completely different shapes, and the same conclusion in each case. The school is not measuring how high you can reach. It is measuring what is wrong with you, and then it is putting everyone whose wrongness is large enough into one room together and seeing what they do. Which, when you say it plainly, is a strange and fairly cruel thing to do to 40 16-year-olds. It is also, and this is the uncomfortable part, an extremely effective way of finding out who can change. Before we go through them, it is worth being precise about how many of them there are, because this is the single most mangled fact about this class anywhere. The class begins with roughly 40 students. If you have watched the earlier seasons and formed the impression that it is a much smaller room, around 25, that impression came from the animation rather than from the school. 15 classmates were simply left out of the adaptation in the early seasons, because animating 40 distinct background students every time the camera enters a classroom is expensive, and most of them had no lines. Season 4 restored them. The seating chart drawn in the second year shows all 40 places, and one of them is marked vacant, and we will get to why that seat is empty in time. So the honest number is 40 at the start, and 39 after the day this class loses somebody. That distinction matters more than a piece of trivia usually would, because the size of the room changes what kind of story this is. 25 students is a group. You can know 25 people. A leader can hold 25 names and 25 weaknesses in her head and work out who to put where. If Class D were 25 students, Horikita's task would be difficult but essentially tractable, and her failure to manage it in the first year would look like a simple failure of effort. 40 is something else. 40 is past the number at which one person can personally know everybody, which is precisely why organizations of that size need structure rather than a clever individual at the top. It is also why a class of 40 can burn 1,000 class points in a month without any single person doing anything dramatic. It only takes each of them being slightly careless. And it is why the 4 students the story is built around are not simply the interesting ones. They are the load-bearing ones, in the specific sense that a room of 40 cannot be run without something like all 4 of their functions being performed by somebody. Direction, strategy, information, cohesion. Take any one of those away and the room does not hold. Most of the 40 will never be named in this story. They will sit at their desks, receive their points, take their examinations, and be quietly graded on all of it for 2 years. The school is not following the interesting ones. The school is measuring all 40, all the time, with equal attention and no favorites at all. They also do not begin poor. This surprises people. All 4 classes start the year holding exactly 1,000 class points, which is to say Class D is not handed a smaller allowance to reflect its letter. It begins level with Class A. Everything that happens to its balance afterward, it does to itself. And what it does to itself in the first month is spectacular. The mechanism works like this. Each class holds a number called class points, and at the start of every month each student receives private points equal to 100 times that number. Private points are money, spendable anywhere on campus, at a rate of 1 point to 1 yen. A class sitting on 1,000 class points therefore pays each of its students 100,000 private points, which is a very large sum to place in the hands of a 16-year-old on their first morning. Nobody explains what it is. That silence is the entire examination. Class D takes the money and behaves like people who have been given a gift. They spend, which is reasonable enough, but they also arrive late and talk through lessons and use their phones in class and treat the room as somewhere they happen to be sitting rather than something being measured. And every one of those things is being subtracted, quietly, from the number that generates the money. By the start of the second month, Class D has nothing. Not a reduced amount, 0. The class points have been burned all the way down from 1,000 to nothing, and 100 times nothing is nothing, and every screen in that room reads the same flat figure. The school's own record of the month gives the reason without any sympathy at all, noting that the students of Class D violated so many school rules that their class points diffused entirely. For comparison, Ryuan's class, which is not exactly a monastery, finished that same month still holding around 490. They claw back a little. The midterm examinations earn them 87 class points, which is why their next monthly payment is not another 0 but 8,700 private points, 100 times 87, a number small enough to be its own kind of lesson. They have gone from 100,000 to 8,500, and they now understand exactly why. That first month is the most efficient piece of assessment the school performs all year. It costs nothing, it teaches nothing, and it produces a perfect map of who these 40 people are. It shows which of them spent everything immediately and which held back. It shows who noticed something was wrong and said so, and who noticed and stayed quiet, and who never noticed at all. Every defect in that room announced itself within 30 days, without a single teacher having to point at anybody. And it is worth being fair to them about how the trap was built, because the design is genuinely unfair in a way that is easy to miss. Nobody lied, every rule existed and was technically available. The money really was theirs and they really could spend it on anything, and no teacher ever described it as a stipend or promised it would repeat. The school simply declined to explain and then waited. But consider what the same silence does to 4 different classes. Class A contains students who have been taught, by whatever route brought them there, to assume that an unexplained gift is a test. Class D contains students who have mostly never been given anything without strings and have no reason to model an institution as adversarial rather than merely generous. The examination is identical for everybody, and it is not remotely equal, because it rewards a specific kind of suspicion that correlates almost perfectly with the background that gets you sorted upward in the first place. That is the thing about this school that the letters conceal. It presents itself as a pure meritocracy, a place where anyone can climb, and its very first assessment quietly favors the students who arrived already knowing how places like it work. Class D failed that test comprehensively. It is genuinely their failure, and they genuinely earned the 0. It is also the case that they were handed a test in a language nobody had taught them, and then graded on their fluency. And with that map drawn, we can start going through the room. There are 4 students this class is genuinely built around, and it is worth taking them slowly, because almost everything that happens over 2 years happens because of the way these 4 interact. The first sits at seat number 21, and is called Kiyotaka Ayanokoji. On the surface there is nothing to say about him. He is unremarkable to look at, quiet without being interestingly quiet, the sort of student a teacher's eye passes over on the way to somebody else. His entrance assessment is a wall of middling grades: C for academic ability, C- for intellect, C- for judgment, C- for physical ability, and a D for cooperativeness. Read that card and you see a boy who is slightly below average at everything and mildly antisocial. Then you learn how he produced it. On the entrance examination, he scored exactly 50 points on every single subject. Not a good score, not a bad score. The precise mathematical center held perfectly across every paper he sat. That is not what mediocrity looks like. Mediocrity is uneven. Scoring exactly half marks on everything requires knowing every answer and then choosing, question by question, which ones to get wrong. He came out of a place called the White Room, a facility that raised children as an engineering project, and he is the one they did not have to discard. Physically and mentally, he is somewhere the other students in this school cannot see from where they are standing. And Chabashira, looking at a room full of documented flaws, names him the most defective student in it, not because he lacks something, because he conceals. In a school built to measure people accurately, a student who deliberately falsifies his own readings is the one genuine malfunction in the room. His function across 2 years is to run the class without ever appearing to. He installs a visible leader and works behind her. He operates through other people, most consistently through a girl named Keikaru Izawa, so that results arrive without a trail leading back to him. And the class, which never once catches him at it, ends up certifying him anyway. On the day they are all asked to say who in the room they value, he receives more praise votes than anyone else, 42 of them, from 39 people who could not tell you a single specific thing he has done. By the second year, when the school starts publishing its full evaluations, his academic rating jumps from a C at 51 to an A- at 81. That is not him improving. That is him deciding to let a fraction of it show. It is worth staying with the entrance examination a moment longer, because that one decision explains the whole character. Consider what 50 on every subject actually requires. To score 0, you need only refuse to answer. To score full marks, you need only know everything. To score exactly half on every paper in every subject, you need to know every answer and then perform a continuous act of arithmetic across the entire examination, tracking how many marks each remaining question is worth and discarding precisely the right ones. It is significantly harder than simply winning. And he did it because a perfect score would have placed him in Class A, where he would have been visible, and a poor score would have placed him in D as a genuine failure and drawn a different kind of attention. Exactly half placed him in the bottom class as an unremarkable case, which is precisely where a person goes if what they want is for nobody to look at them. The most striking thing about it is the patience. He made that decision before he had met a single person at this school, before he knew what the class system did or what the points meant, and he has stuck to it for 2 years while sitting through examinations that could have expelled him. He watched his own class nearly lose pseudo. He watched Horikita break herself on an island. He has intervened constantly and never once been credited, and the only time the class formally registered an opinion about him, it handed him more praise than anybody else while remaining entirely unable to say why. There is a version of this boy who is simply a genius operating in the dark. There is another version, closer to what the story keeps showing us, of a person so thoroughly built for concealment that he no longer has the option of being seen, and who is quietly running experiments on a room full of teenagers because it is the first environment he has ever been in where anything is uncertain. Beside him at seat number 22 is Suzune Horikita. She is the opposite kind of problem. Where he hides everything, she hides nothing and cannot imagine why she should. Her entrance assessment is genuinely excellent: an A for academic ability, an A- for intellect, a B+ for physical ability. On raw numbers, she has no business being in this room, and she knows it, and her working theory for most of her first year is that a clerical error has been made. The error is on her card, one line down: cooperativeness E. That is why she is here, not the marks. The school looked at a girl with elite academics and no functioning ability to work alongside another person, and filed her exactly where it meant to. She arrived believing that friends are weight, that people who need other people have chosen to be slower, and she said so out loud to anyone who offered. Underneath that there is a brother, Manabu Horikita, a third-year Class A, president of the student council, and the standard against which she has measured herself since she was small. She enrolled at this school to be recognized by him, and he responded by telling her to withdraw because a sister in the bottom class embarrassed him. Every cold thing she does traces back to that. She becomes the class's public leader and its representative, and the whole of her first year is the slow, frequently humiliating business of converting a solo prodigy into somebody who can actually command a room. By the second year, the class is simply referred to as Horikita's class. Her published evaluations tell the story more cleanly than any scene. Academic ability, a minus at 82. Physical, B at 71. Social contribution, B plus at 80, which is the scale that asks whether you can work with people at all, and which is the exact defect that put her in this room. And her adaptability sits at a C minus, at 42, the lowest thing on her card by a distance. She learned to work with people. She never quite learned to improvise. The third of the four is Kikeyo Kushida, and she is the most complicated person in the building. On the surface, she is the class's son, relentlessly friendly, universally liked, the girl who learns every name in the first week and remembers it, who has contacts in all four classes and can get a message to anyone. Her assessment card carries an A for cooperativeness, the highest in the class, alongside a B for academics and a B for physical ability. She is, on paper and in person, the model of what the school says Class D lacks. Underneath, the friendliness is constructed. It is a mask worn with enormous skill over something genuinely malicious. She keeps a private record of what everybody in the class is hiding, and she does not want Class D to succeed, and her hatred of Horikita in particular is personal, rooted in a shared history from middle school that Horikita is in a position to expose. So the class contains, at the same time, its single best source of information and the reason it keeps leaking. The joke the school plays with her numbers is very dry. Her published evaluations come out at a B for academics, an A minus for adaptability, a C plus for physical ability, and an A for social contribution, giving her an overall B at 74, the second highest score in the class. The saboteur reads on paper as a model student, and when the class is asked to name who they value, she places third in praise. The mask holds across everything the animation shows us, it holds. What makes her genuinely unsettling, rather than simply a villain sitting in a nice room, is that the friendliness is not fake in the way a bad liar's friendliness is fake. She's actually good at it. The kindness she performs produces real results. She learns names because she has decided to, and she remembers them because she has decided to, and people are genuinely helped by her, and the help is genuinely useful, and none of that is contradicted by what she is doing underneath. That is a much harder thing to catch than a lie. A lie can be checked. What Kushida does is arrange, over and over, for the outcome to be slightly worse than it needed to be, while every individual action she takes is defensible, and most of them are actively good. You cannot find her by auditing her behavior. You can only find her by watching her over a long stretch and asking what she seems to want, which requires paying a kind of attention to a person that almost nobody in that class is capable of. And there is a symmetry to her that the school probably enjoys. Horikita's defect is that she cannot pretend to care about anybody. Kushida's defect is that she can pretend perfectly and does not. They are the same failure viewed from opposite ends, which is presumably why they cannot be in a room together, and why the school put them in the same one. There is a scene that a lot of people associate with her, the one where the whole thing finally comes apart and Horikita takes her to pieces and then deliberately keeps her in the class anyway, because a broken asset is still an asset. That scene is real, and it is very good, and it sits just past the end of the animated story, so it is not one we are going to walk through here. The fourth is Yosuke Hirata, at seat number 6, and he is the one people underrate. He is the ideal student, more or less. Handsome, kind, athletic, endlessly patient, the class's original representative and the person everyone goes to when something needs settling. His card reads a minus for cooperativeness, B plus for judgment, and a steady row of BS elsewhere. If you were designing a boy to hold a difficult class together, you would arrive at roughly Hirata. But the kindness is not a virtue in the way it looks. It is a compulsion. His need for nobody to be hurt is driven by something that happened to him rather than chosen as a principle, and it is brittle in a specific way. He is excellent at preventing harm and completely unable to allocate it. On the day this class is required to select somebody to lose, he does not argue a better position and win. He breaks down. That is his defect, and it is a real one, and the school found it. A person who cannot make a hard call is not a person who can lead through a hard year. His evaluations, though, are extraordinary. B plus for academics at 76, B for adaptability at 75, B plus for physical at 79, a minus for social contribution at 85, and an overall B plus at 78, which is the highest evaluation of any second-year student in the entire school. Not the highest in Class D, the highest in the year, across all 4 classes, held by a boy sitting in the class the school built for its flawed cases. There is something almost pointed in that. The single best-rated student of his year is in D, and he is in D because he is too gentle to sacrifice anybody, and the school considers that a defect worth demoting him for. It is worth arguing with the school about that one, because it is the place where its whole philosophy is most exposed. The school's position is coherent. A leader who cannot choose when choosing is the only option available is a leader who will let the whole group take damage rather than accept responsibility for allocating it. Hirata does exactly that when tested. He does not find a better answer and win the argument. He stops functioning. By the standard the school applies, that is a real limitation, and it is fair to call it one. But look at what the same trait produces on every other day of the year. The class holds together through a brutal first term because he holds it together. People bring him problems they would bring to nobody else. When the room is one bad argument away from splitting, he is the reason it does not. Across 2 years, the quality the school marked as his defect is doing more practical work than almost anybody's talent. And the school knows this, which is why his overall rating is the highest in the year. It has measured him accurately, decided he is the best-rounded student of his generation, and left him in the bottom class anyway, because a school built to produce people who can win does not have a category for someone whose main gift is preventing harm. That tension sits underneath everything else we are going to look at. This place is very good at identifying what is wrong with a person. It is much less interested in whether the thing it has labeled a flaw is actually a flaw, or whether it is simply a virtue that happens to be inconvenient in a competition. Hirata is the clearest case. He is not in Class D because he is worse than the students in Class A. He is in Class D because he is kind in a way that cannot be weaponized, and this school weaponizes everything. Those four are the load-bearing structure. Ayanokoji supplies strategy from somewhere out of frame, Horikita supplies direction and takes the visible weight, Kushida supplies information and quietly drains the tank, and Hirata holds the social fabric together while the other three pull at it. Everyone else in the room is going to be shaped by the pressure those four generate, and there are 36 of them, and most of them are far more interesting than the school's opinion of them suggests. Including 3 boys who spend their first year confirming every bad assumption anybody has ever made about the bottom class, and who turn out, between them, to be the whole argument for why this class was worth saving. They are known throughout the school and to themselves as the 3 idiots, and they wear it with a certain amount of pride, which tells you most of what you need to know about how the first year is going for them. The first is Ken Sudo, and he is the most straightforwardly tragic student in the room, in the sense that everything wrong with his position was decided before he ever walked through the door. He has red-dyed hair and a permanent scowl, and he sleeps through most lessons. He plays basketball seriously, and he is very good at it. His entrance assessment reads physical ability. That is not a school being generous. His published rating in the second year comes out at an A+ at 96, which is the highest physical rating of anyone in his entire year, across all 4 classes. And his academic ability is an E. That is the whole of it. He is the best athlete of his generation at this school, and he cannot pass a written test, and the school looked at those 2 facts and decided the second one mattered more. It is worth sitting with how differently his life goes at almost any other school in the country, where a boy who is genuinely exceptional at a sport is an asset to be protected rather than a defect to be filed. Here, his talent is worth nothing to his class, because none of the examinations that determine a class's fate are athletic in a way that a single outstanding player can decide. His weakness, on the other hand, is worth a great deal, because it can get him expelled and take a chunk of the class with him. Which very nearly happens. He fails English by a single point, 1 mark below the line, and the school's response is that he is to be removed. What saves him is money. Ayanokoji and Horikita each pay Chabashira around 50,000 private points to purchase the marks that keep him enrolled, in a month when their class had received a fraction of its normal allowance, and Horikita in particular is at pains to explain that the expenditure was purely rational. He is also the cause of the class's first genuine crisis, when he is accused of assaulting 3 students from Ryuan's class. It is a serious accusation, and the school is not inclined to give a Class D student with a documented temper the benefit of any doubt. The matter is only resolved when the accusers withdraw, which happens because Horikita and Ayanokoji corner them somewhere covered by cameras and make continuing extremely unattractive. So he spends most of a year being a liability and being told so and behaving accordingly. And then he changes more completely than anybody else in the room. The numbers are the cleanest way to see it because they are not sentimental. His academic rating starts at an E+ at 20, which is very close to the floor. It ends at a C at 54. His social contribution starts at an E+ at 19 and ends at a C+ at 60. His overall goes from a C at 47 to a B- at 63. That is the largest improvement of any student in the class, by a distance, and it belongs to the boy everybody had written off as the problem. The mechanism is not complicated and it is not clever. Somebody sat him down and taught him repeatedly, and did not give up when he was rude about it. The person who did that was Hori Kita, who had earlier insulted him out of a study group. He would not listen to anybody else. She was the only one he would take it from, and the reason he would take it from her is that she was the one who paid to keep him. There is a moment in the class's hardest day where all of this becomes visible. When the class is asked to name the students they want gone, Pseudo receives the second highest number of those votes, 21 of them. He was genuinely close to being the one who left. A room full of people who had watched him improve for a year still, when asked in private, put him near the top of the list. He stays and he keeps going anyway. There is a detail in his story that is easy to pass over and is, on reflection, the saddest thing about this class. When Pseudo failed English by 1 mark and the school moved to remove him, the fix was not tutoring. It was not a second chance or a resit or any of the things a school ordinarily reaches for. The fix was that 2 16-year-olds paid cash to purchase examination marks from their own teacher, and the teacher sold them at a published rate without any apparent sense that something strange was happening. That is worth stopping on. The school has a price list for academic results. It will remove a student for falling 1 point short, and it will also sell that point to anybody who can afford it, and both of those facts are simply features of the system rather than a scandal. Which means that the difference between Ken Pseudo graduating and Ken Pseudo being thrown out of school at 16 was whether 2 of his classmates happened to have 100,000 points between them, in a month when their class had been reduced to a fraction of its income. He did not know at the time that it had happened. He found out later, and what he did with it is the whole of his arc. A boy who had spent a year being told he was a liability discovered that 2 people had spent real money to keep him and decided to become worth it. That is not a story about a school teaching a boy discipline. It is a story about a boy who was nearly discarded by an institution and was saved by 2 classmates, one of whom had insulted him out of a study group a few weeks earlier. The second idiot is Kanji Ike, and he is the human face of that first month. He is short and loud and relentlessly, exhaustingly interested in girls. His self-introduction on the first day is essentially a statement that he likes girls, dislikes handsome boys, and would like a girlfriend, delivered to a room of strangers. He's behind the plan to spy on the girls at the pool. His grades are poor, and the school's stated reason for placing him in Class D is simply that his abilities are below average, which is almost refreshing next to the more elaborate defects around him. And when the 100,000 points arrive, Ike spends all of it, every point within a few weeks, on video games and junk, with no thought at all that it might not come again. It is easy to laugh at him for it, and the show invites you to, but he is also doing exactly what he was invited to do by an institution that handed a 16-year-old a large sum of money and deliberately declined to explain what it was. He is not the villain of that month. He is its clearest victim, and the fact that his failure is comic rather than dignified does not make it less of a trap. What is genuinely interesting about Ike is a line on his assessment that does not match the rest of him. Academic ability, E+, intellect, D-, and then judgment, C+, which is the highest of the 3, and a cooperativeness of C, which is better than Hori Kita's, better than Ko-NG's, better than most of the people who look down on him. His published rating in the second year confirms it. Adaptability, C+ at 60, which is well above the class's stars in that column. He is not academically able and he never becomes so, but he can read a situation and he can work with people, and in a class this dysfunctional those are not small things. He also receives the 3rd highest number of removal votes, 20 of them, on the day the class is asked. Between Pseudo and Ike, 41 of the votes to remove somebody went to 2 boys whose real crime was being loud and behind. The 3rd is Haruki Yamauchi, and he is the one who does not come back. He begins in the same place as the other 2, a poor student with a big mouth, and for a long stretch he is simply the 3rd member of a comic trio, but his entrance interview flagged something the others do not have. A tendency to lie. That is his listed defect, and unlike an E in academics, it is not something a study group can fix. What happens to him is that somebody finds a use for it. Arisu Sakayanagi, who runs Class A and collects people the way other students collect points, offers him something in exchange for working against his own class. She dangles the promise of becoming his girlfriend and asks him to manipulate Class D into expelling Ayanokoji. He takes it, and the change in him afterward is genuinely unpleasant to watch, because it is not the change of a boy being corrupted against his nature. It is a boy who has been handed permission. He starts calling himself the class's lethal weapon. He announces that he is under the protection of Class A and therefore cannot possibly be expelled, which he appears to believe completely. And when Sakayanagi runs a campaign of rumors against particular students, he does not merely go along with it. He enjoys it. He takes visible pleasure in tormenting the classmates she has selected. He becomes so obnoxious in this stretch that Sudo and Ike, the other 2/3 of the three idiots, are disgusted by him. That is the measure of it. The two boys who have spent a year being the class's embarrassment look at what their friend has become and want no part of it. He is the empty seat in the second year's chart. The class begins with 40 students and finishes the animated story with 39, and the missing one is him, and the day it happens is the hardest day this class ever has, which we will come to. Away from the three of them, the class contains one student whose whole presentation is a construction, and she is arguably the most important person in the room after the core four. Keikaru Izawa is the leader of the girls, and she is loud, fashionable, spends recklessly, and is publicly dating Hirata. She is, on first appearance, exactly the kind of student the phrase bottom class is meant to conjure. Almost none of that is what it looks like. The relationship with Hirata is not a romance. It is an arrangement, a shield, two people covering for each other for reasons that have nothing to do with affection. She was severely bullied in middle school, badly enough to leave a physical scar she still carries and a set of responses that have not gone anywhere, and the arrogance she performs is armor she built specifically so that she would never be a target again. Her assessment is a row of low grades: D- for academics, D- for intellect, D for physical and cooperativeness, E+. The school's stated reason for placing her here is her below-average results and a pattern of unexplained absences in middle school, which is the school describing the aftermath of what happened to her without any apparent interest in the cause. Ayanokoji works out what she is fairly early, and then he takes her over, which is the honest word for it. She becomes his instrument inside the class, the proxy through which most of his work reaches the room, and the arrangement is not kind, and it is also the first time anybody has looked at her and seen the whole thing rather than the performance. Her importance is confirmed in the ugliest possible way when Ryuen abducts her onto a rooftop, specifically to force the hidden operator of Class D into the open. He does this because he has correctly worked out that she is the thread. He is right, and it works, and what follows is a confrontation that belongs to Ayanokoji rather than to her. Her second-year adaptability rating comes out at a B-, at 61, which is the highest number on her card by a wide margin. Whatever else the school thinks of her, the girl who taught herself to survive a hostile room by reading it correctly is very good at adjusting to circumstances. And then there is Rokusuke Koenji, who is the purest illustration of the defect thesis in the entire school, and who would be insulted to be described as anything so useful. He is the heir to a wealthy family of scholars, flamboyant, theatrically vain, given to admiring his own reflection in the middle of other people's sentences. He hands out nicknames to everyone rather than learning theirs. Ayanokoji, to him, is elevator boy, and no explanation is ever offered. His entrance assessment reads academic ability, A physical ability, A on the two scales that measure what a person can actually do. He is at the ceiling, and on raw capability he is arguably the most gifted student in his year, and possibly in the building. His cooperativeness is rated E-, not EE-, which is a grade the school apparently had to invent extra room for. Every other student in this class has a defect that costs them something. Koenji's defect is that he is superb and has decided that none of it is available to anybody else, ever, under any circumstances, and no amount of pressure has yet been found that changes his mind. He proves it during the class's first serious examination. Halfway through the week on the uninhabited island, with his class depending on every member, he simply stops participating, at a cost of 30 points to a class that could not afford 30 points. He is entirely unrepentant about it. There is no scene where he is talked round, no moment where the group's need reaches him. He was bored, so he left, and the class absorbed the damage. What makes him genuinely interesting rather than merely obnoxious is that he is clearly sandbagging, and everybody can tell, and nobody can do anything about it. His published second-year ratings put his academics at a B, at 71, and his physical ability at a B+, at 78, which are strong numbers, and are also visibly not the numbers of a student who arrived with a double A. His adaptability reads D-, at 24, and his social contribution D- at 25. Those last two columns are not measuring what he can do, they are measuring whether he will, and the answer is a flat and consistent no. There is a real question, which the story deliberately never fully answers, about how far above everyone else he actually sits. It is safer to say that no one has yet found the edge of it than to put a number on him. What can be said is that the school looked at its single most capable first-year student, weighed his refusal to lift a finger for anybody against all of it, and put him in the bottom class. Then there is Eri Sakura, who is the quietest person in the class and one of the sharpest. She is timid to the point of pain, soft-spoken, and hides behind a pair of thick glasses. She is an amateur photographer, and before she came here she worked as a gravure idol under the name Shizuku, which is a piece of her past she is desperate to keep buried, and which nearly surfaces during her first year until Ayano Koji quietly diffuses it. Her assessment is unremarkable, a C+ for academics and low grades elsewhere, with a cooperativeness of D- that reflects an anxiety rather than any unwillingness. But she does something in her first year that almost nobody in that class manages. She notices what kushida is. Not the details and not with any evidence she could present, but the friendliest, most universally liked girl in the class, whose mask is good enough to fool a room of 40 people for 2 straight years, is seen through by the shy girl who cannot make herself speak in front of a group. That is what social anxiety looks like from the inside sometimes. She has spent her whole life watching people extremely carefully in order to work out whether she is safe, and it has made her a better reader of a face than anyone else in the room. She first appears as the witness to Sudo's fight, and her struggle to come forward is genuine and difficult, and she does it. She becomes one of the founding members of the small friend group that forms around Ayano Koji, which is the closest thing he has to an ordinary life. Alongside her in that group are 3 others. Teruhiko Yukimura, who dislikes his own given name because it came from the mother who left, and who goes by Keisei, the name his father gave him. Both are genuinely his. If you have seen him called one and then the other and assumed somebody made a mistake, nobody did. He is the class's top academic boy, gray-haired and bespectacled and short-tempered, with an A for academic ability and an A- for intellect. His physical ability is a D- and his cooperativeness is a D-, and that is why he is here. His second-year academic rating is an A, at 92, the highest in Class D, and his arc, quietly, is that he begins by looking down on the rest of the class and ends up personally tutoring its weakest students before examinations. Akito Miyake, who is quiet and honest and physically capable, and who competed at country level in archery in middle school. His defect is that he let it consume him. He neglected everything else and picked fights, and the school assessed him down accordingly. He has the 4th highest grip strength in the class, which is the kind of detail this school records about people. And Haruka Hasebe, long blue-haired with a mole beneath her left eye, guarded with strangers and sardonic and talkative with the few people she trusts, who hands out nicknames to her friends and who skipped the class swimming session, which is entirely in character. The 4 of them, plus Ayano Koji, are the closest thing the story has to a group of teenagers simply being teenagers. It is worth dwelling on that group for a moment, because it is doing something in this story that nothing else does. Everywhere else in this school, a relationship is a position. Horikita acquires Ayano Koji by buying him lunch and calling in the debt. Karuizawa and Hirata are a public arrangement covering 2 private wounds. Kushida's friendships are a filing system. Ryuen's class follows him because they are afraid of him. Even Ichinosei's class, which genuinely loves her, is a block that can be attacked precisely because the affection is real. The 4 of them just eat lunch together. Yukimura is short-tempered and academically arrogant and slowly stops being both. Miyake is quiet and straightforward and takes people at face value, including a boy he has every reason to find suspicious after a strange incident with a mathematics score. Hasebe is sardonic and guarded and hands out nicknames to the 3 people she has decided are safe. Sakura is frightened of nearly everything and turns up anyway. None of them has worked out what Ayano Koji is. They are not a strategic asset, and he does not appear to have recruited them for anything. They are, as far as the story ever shows us, simply a group of ordinary students who like each other, orbiting a boy who has never in his life had that and does not entirely know what to do with it. Which is why they matter. This school assesses everything. It grades cooperativeness at the door, publishes social contribution scores in the second year, and measures every interaction these students have for 2 solid years. And the one genuinely unmeasured thing in the entire building is 4 teenagers deciding, for no strategic reason at all, that they would rather sit together. There is a case to be made that the boy from the white room, who was raised in a facility with no friends and no windows and no purpose except results, learns more from those lunches than from any examination the school sets him. The story never says that outright, but it does keep showing him there. Satsuki Shinohara sits somewhat outside all of this, warm within her own circle and sharply distrustful of anyone outside it. She's quick to accuse the boys when Karuizawa's underwear goes missing, and quick, in the middle of the pseudo-crisis, to argue that he should simply be expelled for the trouble he has caused, which she says before she knows the full picture. She spends most of 2 years in low-grade conflict with Ike, and by the second year that friction has softened into something that looks a great deal like the beginning of a friendship. Maya Sato is regarded as the second leader of the girls after Karuizawa, brown-haired and relaxed and popular, and conscious of protecting that impression. She develops an open crush on Ayanokoji and briefly dates him, and she goes to Karuizawa privately for advice specifically because she does not want the class finding out that she is inexperienced. Mei Yu Wang, known to everyone as Mi-chan, came to Japan from China in elementary school. She is quiet and academically formidable and a strong linguist, and she achieved the highest score in the entire class on the English midterm, in the year when a boy nearly got expelled for failing that same subject by 1 mark. Her second-year academic rating is an A- at 84. She's one of the most capable students in the room and one of the least discussed. Chiaki Matsushita is much the same case. Calm, long brown-haired, kind to everybody without going out of her way to make friends, raised in a comfortable household where good results earned her what she wanted. She keeps deliberately low profile through the first year. Her second-year overall rating comes out at a B- at 63, which puts her among the highest in Class D, well above students with 10 times her screen time. If this class has a most underrated member, it is her. And Hideo Sotomura, bespectacled and slightly chubby with spiky black hair, a committed otaku who addresses his classmates in deliberately archaic Japanese and collects information obsessively. His card shows the classic shape of this room, an intellect of C+ set against a physical ability of E. He spends most of 2 years at the edge of events and then seizes his one real opportunity when it arrives. Beyond them, the class thins into people the story never had time for. Soshi Miyamoto, present from the first episode and in every season since, with nothing recorded about him at all. Kokoro Inogashira, shoulder-length brown hair, so nervous that she stutters through her own introduction on the first day until Kushida steps in to reassure her, which is a small early demonstration of exactly why Kushida's mask works. Nene Mori, light brown-haired, part of Karuizawa's circle, usually somewhere near Matsushita. There is something worth saying about those three, and about the dozen or so like them. They are not less important because the story did not have room. They are 40 people, and a story can carry perhaps 12, but the school is not carrying 12. It is assessing all 40 every month, and every one of those quiet background students received the same 100,000 points, made the same choice about how to spend it, and was measured on it just as carefully as Horikita was. Which means the class's collapse in that first month was not caused by its loud members. It was caused by 40 people, most of whom you will never hear speak, all making an ordinary decision at the same time. And its recovery is going to have to work the same way. The recovery, when it comes, does not look like a recovery. It looks like the class being handed a knife. The examination is announced without ceremony. Over 4 days, every student is to evaluate their classmates, and then everybody votes. 3 praise votes each, and 3 criticism votes each. Praise and criticism cancel one another out, so a student's result is simply the number of people who wanted them gone minus the number who wanted them kept. You cannot vote for yourself in either direction. You cannot vote twice for the same person. You cannot abstain, submit a blank ballot, or refuse to take part. And every student must additionally cast 1 praise vote for somebody in a different class, which is a small detail that turns out to matter enormously. The student in each class with the most praise votes receives a protection point, which is the right to cancel an expulsion at some future date, and which cannot be given away. The student in each class with the most criticism votes is expelled. There is 1 exit from that, and it costs 20 million private points, a sum so far beyond an ordinary student that mentioning it is close to a joke. And if the vote produces no clear result, it simply runs again, and again. The examination does not end until somebody is at the bottom. There is a naming problem here that trips up almost everyone who tells this story, and it is worth clearing up before we go on. By this point in the year, the letters had moved. Horikita's class had been promoted and was formally labeled Class 1C, and Ryuan's class had dropped into 1D, so when the results of this examination are written down, the row marked Class 1C is the class we have been following, and the row marked 1D is ruins. The class we have been calling Class D is, on paper, no longer Class D at all. It has climbed one rung, which is the first quiet piece of good news in this entire story, and it arrives just in time for the worst day the class ever has. Horikita's response to the examination is the decision that defines her as a leader, and it is not a nice one. She works out immediately that the class cannot avoid losing somebody because the rules do not permit it. Her first instinct, that everyone should vote identically so the numbers cancel and nobody is chosen, is taken apart by Chabashira in a sentence. A void result does not end the examination. It repeats it. All a tie buys is more days of 39 people looking at each other and wondering. So the only variable left is who, and Horikita decides that if her class is going to lose a member, it is going to lose the one she chooses, and it is going to happen quickly rather than after a week of fear. She concentrates the class's criticism votes on Haruki Yamauchi, and she makes the case out loud. The grounds are not that he is a poor student, although he is. The grounds are that he has been working for Class A under instructions from Arisu Sakayanagi. He had been trying to swing more than half of his own classmates into voting Ayanokoji out. His payment for this was to be Class A's cross-class praise votes, delivered to him, which under the rules of this examination would have made him untouchable. That is the reason the cross-class praise rule matters. It is what made betrayal purchasable. And it is also where the whole thing turns, because Sakayanagi never intended to pay him. She sent Class A's praise votes to Ayanokoji instead. Her reason was personal. In an earlier incident, Yamauchi had knocked her to the floor, Sakayanagi being a girl who walks with a cane, and made a crude remark about her while she was down there. She waited, and she let him work for her for weeks, and then she settled it. So Yamauchi's last day arrives with him believing he is protected by an arrangement that had been dead from the moment he made it. He had spent the preceding weeks telling everyone he was the class's lethal weapon. He had announced repeatedly that Class A was shielding him and that he could not possibly be expelled. He had taken open pleasure in tormenting the classmates Sakayanagi's rumor campaign had selected, until Sudo and Ike, his two closest friends in the world, wanted nothing more to do with him. Horikita lays out what he has been doing. The class turns on him as a single block, and he does not have 20 million points, or anything within 1,000 miles of it. The numbers from that day are worth reading slowly, because they are more human than the story around them. In Horikita's class, Ayanokoji receives 42 praise votes, the most in the room, from 39 people who could not name one specific thing he had done. Hirata takes the second most. Kushida takes the third, which is the mask holding right to the end. And behind Yamauchi's 33 criticism votes come Ken Sudo with 21 and Kanji Ike with 20. Sit with that, 21 people wanted Sudo gone, 20 wanted Ike gone. If Horikita had not stood up and directed the class at a single target, if the votes had simply been cast the way people privately felt, the boy who was expelled that day would very plausibly have been Sudo, and the story of this class would be a completely different and much sadder one. The other classes lose people too. Yahiko Totsuka is expelled from Class A. Shiho Manabe is expelled from Ruin's class. Ryuji Kanzaki of Class B takes the most criticism votes among his own classmates and is the only student in the entire year to survive it, because Ichinosei's class raises the 20 million points and buys him out, which tells you something about Ichinosei's class that no amount of description would. 3 students are expelled across the year group in a single day. It is the first examination in the school's story that removes first-year students at all. Yamauchi does not go quietly. When he understands what has happened, that Sakayanagi was never going to protect him, that the class he had been selling has closed around him, that there is no arrangement left to invoke, he turns on the room. He shouts at them. He physically goes at his own classmates and has to be restrained and taken out. It is not a dignified exit, and the story does not try to make it one, but it is worth being careful about what we are watching, because it is easy to file him as simply the unpleasant one who got what he deserved. He was a bad student with a big mouth and a flagged tendency to lie, which is a real defect and which the school identified accurately at the door. And then someone considerably cleverer than him found that defect, offered him the one thing he wanted most in the world, and pointed him at his own class. He was not the architect of anything. He was a tool that Sakayanagi picked up, used for several weeks, and put down. That does not make him innocent. He enjoyed the cruelty, and the enjoyment was his own. But the boy who is dragged out of that classroom is 16, has been comprehensively outplayed by someone who is settling a personal score, and is losing his entire education over it. And the people who voted him out are not villains either. They are 38 teenagers who were told, correctly, that one of them was leaving today, no matter what anybody did. There is one person in that room who cannot do it, and his reaction is the truest thing in the whole examination. Yosuke Hirata does not argue a better plan and lose the vote. He comes apart. The boy whose entire character is built on nobody being hurt is placed in a situation engineered so that somebody must be, and the machinery simply stops. He cannot participate, cannot choose, cannot be talked round. Horikita overrules him. She does not mock him for it, and she does not pretend he is wrong about the ethics. She tells him his position cannot be implemented, which is true, and then she does the thing he cannot do. That is the moment the class acquires a leader, and it costs exactly what it looks like it costs. She has become the person who can allocate harm, and Hirata, who cannot, is the reason the class is still standing close enough together for her decision to hold. Both of those are necessary, neither would work alone, which is, if you step back far enough, the entire argument this class has been quietly making since the first month. And in Horikita's class, the seat stays empty. The class goes from 40 students to 39, and it never goes back. When Season 4 lays out the classroom for the second year, it draws 40 desks, and one of them is simply marked vacant, and it stays on screen in the background of every classroom scene for 16 episodes. That is the thing this class carries into its second year, not a lesson, a gap. What happens afterward is the part that makes all of it worth watching. Before we get to the second year, there is one person in that room we have barely mentioned, and she has been standing at the front of it the entire time. Sei Chabashira is the homeroom teacher of Class D for both years, and she is one of the strangest adults in this story, because it is genuinely difficult to work out whose side she is on. She tells them the truth constantly. She's the one who explains that they are the defective class, and she does it plainly, without cushioning it, in a manner that suggests she considers the information more useful to them than the comfort would be. She's also the one who sells examination marks to students for cash, at a published rate, and who watches a class of 16-year-olds burn 1,000 class points in a month without once mentioning that it is happening. Both of those are her job. That is the part worth sitting with. The school does not employ her to help these students. It employs her to administer a system, answer the questions they actually ask, and let the consequences land. And underneath that there is something else, because she wants Class D to reach Class A very badly, for reasons of her own that have nothing to do with the students in front of her. She has her own history with this school and her own failure to correct, and at various points, she leans on individual students in ways that go well past neutral administration. So the class's relationship with the only adult in the room is roughly the same as its relationship with the institution. She will tell them the truth if they ask precisely the right question. She will not volunteer it. She will sell them a remedy at market rate. And she has her own reasons for wanting them to climb, which are not the same as their reasons, and which she does not explain. For 39 teenagers with no parents on the island and no way off the campus, that is the entire adult supervision available. The class comes back for its second year as Class 2D, 39 students, the same homeroom teacher, and the same two representatives it has effectively had all along, Horikita supplying direction and Hirata supplying cohesion. The school still records them as one of 4 classes, and everybody in the building simply calls them Horikita's class. And the school introduces a new instrument, distributed by the student council president, Miyabi Nagumo. It is an application called Over All Abilities, and it does something the school has never done before. It shows every student their own numbers and everybody else's. 4 scales: academic ability, physical ability, adaptability, social contribution, and an overall figure derived from them, with social contribution weighted at half. It is the first time these 40, now 39, can see exactly what the institution thinks of them, and there is a persistent belief among the students that falling below some threshold will carry a penalty, which means the app is not simply information. It is a permanent, visible source of pressure, sitting in everyone's pocket. What it reveals about this class is genuinely surprising. The highest-rated second-year student in the entire school, across all 4 classes, is Yosuke Hirata, on a B+ at 78. The best all-round student of his generation has been sitting in the bottom class for 2 years because he is too gentle to sacrifice anybody. The second highest in the class is Kikiyo Kushida, at a B and 74, which remains the driest joke in the story. The saboteur reads, on the school's own instrument, as a model student. Ken Sudo's physical rating is an A+ at 96, the highest in his year. Teruhiko Yukimura's academic rating is an A at 92, the highest in the class. Ayanokoji's academic rating moves from a C at 51 to an A- at 81, not because he learned anything, but because he decided to let a portion of it be seen. There is something else Season 4 does that is easy to miss and rather lovely. For 3 seasons, this class had 25 students in it, not in the story in the animation. 15 classmates existed on the page and were simply left out of the adaptation because drawing 40 distinct teenagers in every classroom scene is expensive and most of them never speak. So for years, viewers counted the desks and concluded that Class D was a small room of 25. In the second year, the animation quietly puts all of them back. The seating chart is drawn with 40 places. The 15 who had been absent for 3 seasons are simply there, in the background, in every classroom scene, as though they had never been away. Which means the vacant desk only reads correctly now. In a room of 25, one empty chair is a curiosity. In a room drawn with all 40 places, 39 occupied, and one deliberately left empty, it is a headcount that does not resolve. And it also means that the students we have spent this time on, the ones with names and cards and arcs, were never the class. They were the 12 or so the story had room to follow. The other 28 were sitting there the whole time, receiving the same 100,000 points, making the same decisions, being measured just as precisely, and losing the same 1,000 class points in the same month. And the class's second year begins in last place, on 347 points, carried over from the first year. The first stretch does not go well. A lifestyle penalty takes 72 points off them almost immediately. The first special examination of the year returns 10. Another small lifestyle penalty takes 2 more. They spend the opening volumes of their second year hovering around 280 points, still ranked at the bottom, which is roughly where they started 2 years earlier. Then comes the uninhabited island examination, and it is worth appreciating the symmetry, because this class's first real disaster happened on an island in the first year, when Horikita collapsed with a fever and lost the leader's keycard and had to be carried out. This time the island gives them the largest single gain in the class's history, 288 class points, taking them from 283 to 571 and lifting them from last place to third. And the person who does it is Rokusuke Koenji, the student with the E- in cooperativeness, the one who walked off the first island mid-examination out of boredom and cost the class 30 points and could not be made to care. He wins the second island essentially by himself, against every student in every year of the school, and in doing so he demonstrates on screen, for the first and only time, the thing everybody had always suspected was under there. He does it because Horikita finally worked out that he could not be instructed, only traded with. She offered him permanent freedom to be exactly as selfish as he liked for the remainder of his time at the school if he took first place. He took it and she paid. Which means the largest victory in this class's history was purchased by its leader, agreeing to permanently give up control over its most capable member. That is not a triumph. It is a bill, and she paid it with her eyes open, and it worked. It is worth putting that climb next to the other 3 classes, because a rank only means something in context. Class A under Arisu Sakayanagi has spent 2 years being the class that was already correct. It began at the top and it has largely stayed there, and the interesting thing about it is how little it has had to change. Sakayanagi reads people accurately, decides what they are, and is very rarely wrong, and a class led that way does not develop so much as execute. When it lost a student in the vote, it lost him cleanly and moved on. Class B under Honami Ichinose is the one this class has passed nobody on. Ichinose's class did something in the vote that no other class in the year managed, which was to raise 20 million private points and buy back a classmate who had been marked for expulsion. Think about what that requires. Nearly 40 students, each sitting on their own money, each choosing to hand over a life-changing sum so that one person would not be removed. No other class attempted it. 2 other classes simply let their student go. That is the strongest single piece of evidence in the whole story for what Ichinose has built, and it is also, if you are the sort of person who thinks like this school, an enormous strategic weakness. They spent everything they had on one student. A class that will do that can be bled by anyone patient enough to keep threatening its members. And Ryuan's class, which had climbed into the letter D by this point through the school's reshuffling, runs on fear and produces obedience rather than belief. It also loses a student in the vote without much apparent difficulty. Set against those 3, what Class D does is quietly the most difficult thing on offer. It does not start correct like Sakayanagi's, it cannot afford to buy anybody back like Ichinose's, and it will not hold together under threat like Ryuan's. It has to climb from last place with 39 people, most of whom were placed there for good reasons, using nothing but the slow accumulation of individuals becoming slightly less useless than they were. By the end of the animated story, it has passed Ryuan's class, and Ichinose is only barely ahead. So the animated story leaves this class at 571 points, ranked C, third of 4, one place up from the bottom. Not at the top, it is worth being clear about that, because the number that circulates online for this class is 721 points, and a promotion to Class B, and that comes from further along than the animation has reached. It arrives out of an examination that has not been shown yet. Where the animation actually stops is more modest, and I think better. A class that began at the bottom, burned 1,000 points to 0 in its first month, lost a student permanently in a vote it could not avoid, and has clawed its way to third with 39 people and one empty desk. And that is the answer to the question this whole thing started with, which was what Class D actually is. It is not the stupid class. It never was. It is a room containing the best all-round student of his year, the highest physical rating in the school, one of its strongest academic students, a boy who could win a school-wide examination single-handed if he could be bothered, a girl whose social rating is near the top of her year, and the most capable student in the building sitting quietly at seat 21 pretending to be nothing at all. Every one of them was placed there because of something the school decided was wrong with them. Too proud, too kind, too selfish, too loud, too frightened, too dishonest, too hidden. And the school's position is that those things are defects, and that a defect is what disqualifies you, regardless of what else you happen to be carrying. The class spends 2 years quietly making the opposite argument, not by fixing everybody, because most of them do not get fixed. Sudo is still short-tempered. Koenji still will not help unless it amuses him. Kushida is still exactly what she is, and nothing in the animated story resolves her. Hirata still cannot make a hard call. They simply stop being a collection of individual flaws and start being a class, in which somebody else's strength covers your defect and yours covers theirs, which is the one thing a school built entirely around individual assessment never quite measures. You can see it most clearly by looking at what each of them actually contributed. Sudo could not pass an examination, and Sudo's physical rating carried the class through every event that needed a body. Yukimura could not run and could not talk to people, and Yukimura sat down with the weakest students before every examination and taught them. Karuizawa's grades were near the bottom of the room, and Karuizawa was the channel through which the class's most effective strategist reached the class at all. Ike could not learn anything, and Ike could read a room. Sakura could not speak in front of a group, and Sakura was the one who noticed what Kushida was. Not one of those people stopped having their defect. Every single one of them found a place where it did not matter and something else did. And the school, which grades each of them individually, every month on a card in their pocket, has no column for that. There is a version of this school's philosophy that is hard to argue with. The world does sort people. Ability does matter. Pretending otherwise helps nobody, and a school that told these students they were all equally suited to everything would be lying to them. But the thing the school gets wrong, and keeps getting wrong for 2 straight years, is the assumption that a defect is a property of a person. It is not. It is a property of a person in a situation. Hirata's inability to sacrifice anybody is fatal on exactly one day of the year, and load-bearing on all the others. Koenji's refusal to cooperate costs the class 30 points on one island and wins them 288 on another. The school built a class out of the students whose flaws were largest, put them in a room together, and applied constant pressure, presumably expecting them to sink. What it actually built was the only class in the school where nobody could afford to pretend they were fine on their own. 40 students at the start, 39 at the end, and one desk kept in the room. Sleep well.